of Ethiopia, in a far province international research. The expedition carried out planned work on, and in one of the crevices that cut through the salt marsh, shapes right angles, smooth surfaces, smooth lines. In January 2020, in the northern part of the geologically active area was one of the hottest and hardest to work areas on the planet. Danakil Desert, where the air temperature is at noon, reaches 50 degrees Celsius, and from the ground burst out jets of hot sulfur vapor. Scientists searched for mineral samples and photographed landscapes for atlas of geological anomalies. Crust, they saw something that first seemed to them a bizarre play of light under a layer of crystalline salt at a depth of several meters. The correct geometric. At first, the members of the expedition decided what it was. A natural illusion, since Danakil is famous for its amazing mineral formations, but with closer inspection it became clear this is not a game of nature. This is something else. And it is from this moment that it begins. The story I want to tell today. A story that surprised the whole world and still haven't got the final explanations, and every month brings new details that make scientists think more serious to understand why this finding caused so serious. The reaction of the world's scientific community needs first tell about Ethiopia itself, this country with one of the most long and continuous stories on our planet. Archaeological finds on its territory include the remains of one of the oldest members of the genus Homo, aged more than 3 million years ago. One of the first state cultures of Africa, Aksum Kingdom, existed. In the first centuries of our era, unique monuments of early Christianity carved into the rocks. Temples, Lalibela, churches on the islands of Lake Tana, ancient manuscripts on parchment written in the 6th century. Ethiopia is a huge archaeological laboratory in which each new decade brings discoveries overturning our ideas about history of mankind. That is why any unusual find on its territory becomes the subject of special. Ethiopian archaeologists are used to working in conditions of constant flow of amazing discoveries, and each new requires careful verification. And thinking so here in the very cleft, in the Danakil Desert, scientists discovered something that first mistaken for the foundation of an ancient building. Rectangular structure of tightly fitted stone blocks, folded without visible solution, extended under the layer. Salt for tens of meters, it was clearly artificial. Building her safety in extreme climate was almost incredible. Salt crust covered. Construction apparently formed a millennium back and hermetically preserved the masonry protecting from wind erosion and temperature changes. When archaeologists carefully cleared part of the wall, they saw that blocks covered with carvings, stylized images of animals, plants, and geometric shapes. Carving style did not match any known still culture Africa. He was neither ancient Egyptian nor Nubian nor Exumian. It was something completely its own, not having straight analogues in existing archaeological catalogs. Every detail of the carving was executed with striking accuracy. And it was clear that the masters who worked on these blocks were real professionals in their field. First try to date find gave result, which at first scientists considered a mistake. Radiocarbon analysis of organic residues found in cracks between the blocks showed an age of about 7,000 years. It was built in an era when, according to generally accepted notions in this part, African, there were only small hunting-gatherers. Pastoralist communities capable of large-scale stone construction. Scientists conducted a second analysis, then a third, fourth, and fifth, each times with new samples in different laboratories with different methods. All results came together in the same range. Between 7 and 6.5 thousands of years, it was a time when in most regions, planets only, the formation of the first agricultural crops. This was long before the Giza pyramids, long before Stonehenge, long before any known monuments. Monumental architecture in Africa and themes, no less in front of archaeologists, lay clearly. Artificial complex clearly built by humans, clearly requires significant engineering, knowledge, and organized collective work, each new analysis only confirmed initial results in the scientific community. I had to think seriously. That particularly struck scientists is the level of technical skill stone. Blocks were processed with such precision that between them, you could not slip the knife blade inner surfaces. The walls were polished to mirror shine. Carving on the blocks is made with filigree accuracy, usually available only to masters. Late historical eras with developed tools. And all this in an era when the main material for most peoples was wood and bone. And not the treated stone was a legitimate question. Who built this complex culture, what people, and why it is not preserved? Not a single mention in later historical sources, including the rich traditions of Ethiopia, which usually remembers its history for millennia in depth, answers to these questions. Bye, not found, and every new attempt to reconstruct the past of this region adds more questions than answers. This find immediately caused the most diverse reactions in the global scientific community. Some researchers called for extreme caution. Perhaps there is in dating systematic error and construction significantly younger. Others, on the contrary, assumed that in East Africa, there could be a developed but forgotten civilization, leaving written evidence. Others pointed to the possibility of migrations. Certain people came to Danakil from other regions and brought ready architectural traditions, and then disappeared or dissolved in the local population. Each of these hypotheses had its foundation and its weaknesses, and none gave a complete answer to international archaeological conferences. This finding has been discussed for several years in a row, and the argument only erupts in 2021. The Ethiopian government invited an international team of specialists for comprehensive study. Finds: the team included archaeologists, geologists, anthropologists, specialists in ancient languages and epigraphy. Work went in extremely heavy. The Danakil Desert is one of the most not hospitable places on the planet. Scientists could work on site only in the morning and evening hours because of the daytime heat, made being out in the open unsafe. Topics: at least 2 years of intense excavations were opened several rooms of the complex, and results exceeded expectations. In one of the rooms on the floor were found remains of ceramic vessels made in technology, which in East Africa appears much later. In another, textile fragments, miraculously preserved thanks to the dry climate, and dense salt crust. Analysis of the thread showed that it's flax grown from local plant varieties, painted with natural pigments in saturated blue and red tones. In the third room discovered something even more amazing: stone figures depicting people in poses, very reminiscent of ancient Egyptian postures, sculptures, but at this with its clearly not Egyptian facial features. Style was distinctive, and it did not fit into the famous canons. The most significant find was a stone slab about 2 meters in size covered with signs, which at first glance reminded scientists of hieroglyphs, but upon careful study it became clear that this unknown writing system signs had their own logic, and their structure was. The lines between them were visible separators. There was definitely a letter, but letter of unknown system. But today the plate is still decoded, and every month brings new hypotheses about its content. Linguists broke the signs into repeating groups, revealed possible words and parts of speech, but without bilingual parallel text in a known language. Final decryption is not yet possible. It will take years, maybe decades, but the fact that this plate exists flips our representation, development of writing on the African continent. Before this discovery, it was believed that the first writing in Africa originated in ancient Egypt about 5,000 years back. Ethiopian plate by preliminary dating can be much older. And if this dating is confirmed before us, one of the scientific discoveries of the century in parallel with archaeological work was carried out, and geological research scientists have tried to understand how it was formed. Salt crust mothballed complex Analysis showed that in the area about 7,000 years ago there was an inland sea. Gradually dried, leaving behind giant salt deposits throughout. The complex was built on the shore of this sea after climate change, and the evaporation of water was buried under a layer of salt. This is amazing confluence. Circumstances the water protected, and then salt mothballed the building and caused its exceptional preservation. If it were not for this geological phenomenon, we would never have found out about the existence of this complex. It reminds how random are the great discoveries, and how much in our knowledge depends on a successful coincidence of circumstances. As for the people who could build this complex, here begins the most intriguing part of the story. Local Ethiopian traditions passed down from generation to generation in areas adjacent to. There is a mention of some ancient ancestors who then lived in fertile lands off the coast, large water, and which according to legends disappeared when the water is gone so far. These legends were considered purely folklore material, with no historical basis, but in the light of new archaeological data has a completely different meaning. Possibly in these stories preserved, albeit in a distorted form, the memory of the real ancient civilization existed here long before the written history. Ethiopian ethnologists are now actively working with these traditions, trying to isolate from them elements that may have a historical background. It's a job for years, and it requires extreme delicacy. Folklore is not equal to historical source, but also not equals the empty fiction of me in this story. What is most striking is that modern science, possessing a huge arsenal of methods and technologies anyway, regularly encounters finds that require revision of existing submissions. We used to think that the big picture, the ancient history of mankind, is already well known. What we know, who, where, and when he built the first cities and invented writing states, but the Ethiopian find resembles still lies under the sands, under salt crusts, under the bottom of the dried seas. We do not know, and each new discovery can shift the scope of our understanding to thousands of years deep. This is incredibly inspiring and sobering at the same time. This means that we live in an era when history, humanity, everything, still spelled, and any next archaeological season can bring opening, revering established perceptions. Today the find-in is the object of the most serious scientific research. The Ethiopian government declared territory around protected area and restricted access there by strict rules. Any commission, which includes experts in parallel preparation for application, is for inscription on the World Heritage List. But for this you need to first complete the basic scientific description, and this is how we understand the business of many years parallel. Create a virtual model of the complex on which scientists can study it in detail without disturbing the fragile structure of real construction. This model has already become an object of study for architects, engineers trying to understand what methods of ancient builders could build such a structure ago. And that's what I want to say in conclusion. The story with the Ethiopian, this is a great example of how it works. Finale, and as a living dynamic process in claim to have rewritten history, they say significantly more careful. We have an amazing find that requires further study. We have hypotheses. We have no final answers. Exactly, this is scientific caution on my. The look commands the most respect, and it is she who will ultimately lead to the real. What awaits this discovery in the future? Most likely many more years of careful work, transcript of writing, analysis of all found artifacts, geological reconstructions, comparison with local legends, search for possible in other East Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. Possibly someone who is now listening to this video through stories are the next important step, and maybe final answer to the question, who built the Ethiopian? Be received only after generations, but even the fact itself, the existence of this finding, is already changing our idea of how much rich and complex was the ancient history of our planet. Real science is not like a series with advance, reverse previous views scientists working. 20 years will become a scientist who will
Structures
carved into solid rock thousands of years ago.